Alright guys, I'm here to show you how to create your flat style icon, and I went ahead and created this flat style icon. It's based on the same sketch that we did for the original line-based icon, and there's some slightly different approaches and techniques and tools we're going to use to create this one. Mainly, we're going to be using a lot of the shape builder and the Pathfinder tool to create these large solid shapes in here. Let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Illustrator. Alright, so I went ahead and opened up the same file that I was using for the line-based icon, and as you remember, we created these 8 different artboards for all our different icons that we're going to be making. So what I'm going to do is just assume that I created 3 more line-based icons across here, and now I'm going to create my flat style icon in this artboard here. So in order to get started, I want to make sure that I can see the marks that I need to see on this artboard. So I'm going to click on the artboard tool, and in order to find some of these options here, you need to make sure that you have the application window expanded out as far as it'll go. Because sometimes if you guys are working in smaller windows, so I'll go ahead and squish that in, you might only be seeing something that looks like that. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and expand that out, and as I do that, okay, you can see now I have these other options for dimensioning and for these marks. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this one, and I'm going to change to a center mark, and I'm going to give it some margins. Okay, at this point I'm going to do the same thing that we did before with placing the image template, so the sketch. So I can go File and Place. Okay, and I'll find that sketch that I touched up. I'll hit Place, and then I get the loaded cursor letting me know it wants to put this somewhere. So I have to tell where I want this image to go. And I'll switch over to my black arrow. So unlike this other one, the line-based icon where we worked with the sketch on the bottom of the layer stack, I'm actually going to show you a new technique, and I think this works better for solid color fills. We want actually to have this layer on top, but we want to drop the transparency and still allow some of these dark values to show through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock my templates. I'm going to make sure that this object is down here, not in the strokes, but right here, templates. Make sure I can see that visible. And then I'm going to move templates to the top of the stack. So now that this object is on the very top, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the opacity, and right here where it says normal, I'm going to change this to multiply. Okay, these are called blend modes, and what I'm basically saying is drop out all the light values and only leave these dark values. And you'll see in just a second what that means. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse this. I'm going to lock this template layer. I'm going to lock the strokes layer, and I'm going to unlock color. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this circle tool, and I'll just choose a random color. Let me choose this blue. Make sure I have my color layer selected, and now I will draw this shape. And you can see from here that although I had that solid color shape, you can still see the drawing, okay, overlaid on top. Okay, that's because we changed it to multiply blend mode and we dropped the opacity. So this is how I'm going to work for the first part of this icon in order to reference my sketch. Alright, I'm going to go back to that object, and what I want to do is just kind of line this up so that it fits my margins a little bit better. Remember, it's not going to be exact because it's just a sketch, but if I can just get an approximate placement, that's good. So that looks good. I'll go ahead and lock that. And for your flat icons, I would say you should be working with at least 2 different layers. So in this case, I'm going to work with a background layer where I'll just make some of these background shapes, and then I'm also going to work with a foreground layer, so the building and the base. So you can just reuse the same layers we have here. I could even double click this and say rename this background color, and then I'll rename strokes and foreground for that layer. But for now I'm going to work on the background first. I'm going to make sure that my snap to pixel is off, okay, and I'll just have it on snap to grid. Okay, I'll grab the shape tool, and the first thing I want to do is make that circular container. So I'm going to find the center, and then I'll draw that shape out from that center point. And this time I'll go back, and remember before we chose a color scheme. I chose right here from my libraries, scientific and complementary, and I'm basically just using all of these colors in here. For my background, I'll start off with this blue color. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'll do this shape of the sun while I still have the ellipse tool open, and I'll change that color. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is some of these shapes here. So I'm going to start off with this horizon for this ocean. So I'm going to switch over to my rectangle tool. Since we're working with flat, solid colors, you want to be mostly working with your shapes and less with your line tool. If you do work with your pen tool, you want to make sure that you completely close the shapes, because they're a lot easier to work with the shape builder when you have completely contained or contiguous shapes. So let me try and show you what I mean. So I want to kind of create a whole new shape that encompasses right up here to this horizon, and I want it to fill all of this space here at the bottom of the container. Make this rectangle just go all the way across, and I'll just go ahead and just choose some contrasting color. And at this point, I'm going to use my shape builder tool. So I got my rectangle selected. I'll hold down the shift key and select the circle, and then I'll hit shift and M to get my shape builder. And if you guys remember to subtract from the shapes, you hold down on the option or alt key, and I'll just drag right over this. I'll hit V for my black arrow. Okay, now you can see I have this shape and it perfectly lines up, okay, with the container below it. So I'm going to go ahead and reset some of these colors real quick. So I think I'll change the sky to this more teal color, and I'll have my ocean color be something like that. And this time I'm going to use the pen tool because I want to create this kind of curving path. Okay, this is trying to mimic this shoreline or this beach break. So I'll hit P for pen tool, and I'll start drawing the curves for this shape. Now, even in the middle of drawing, so right now I'm working with a blue, I can actually just come up over here and choose something else for this shape that I'm creating. So I'll just hit the orange color. That way it's a little bit easier to see. I'll go back a little bit, Command Z a few times. Sometimes it works to just be zoomed in a little bit closer on these things, and that way you avoid kind of creating weird lines and aberrations. Alright, so this is the shape I ended up with, and yeah, it looks pretty good. I like the curve it has and its direction, and I know that some of this is going to get covered up by this base over here, so I'm not going to really worry about that. The thing I do need to worry about is this part that hangs out from the container. So I'm going to again use the shape builder. So I'll choose that shape, down on the shift key, select this other shape involved, and I'll hit shift and M for my shape builder, hold down on the option key, and delete that part. And while I'm here, I think I'm actually going to just chop away a little bit more at the top of this rectangle, or the top of this shape here. I think I made it just a little too high. So again, I'll draw a rectangle, make sure that it kind of chops away at the part that I want to delete. So right about there. I'll hit the V key for my black arrow, hold down on shift, select this shape, shift M for my shape builder, and I'll just delete these two shapes. Cool, so I like that a little bit better. Now I actually want to create 3 different shapes here. So I want a shape here. This shape has already been created, but I want this to be a shape here. So again, I'll use the shape builder. I'll select those 2. I'll hold down on shift and M, and then I'll click this shape. You can see where it gets shaded. It's going to be turned into a shape, and then right here, click that part. I'll just go ahead and change this color. And I think I'll change this to a white. Let's see how that looks. Alright, pretty good. So at this point, I'm going to save it. So Command S. You want to make sure that you're saving often while you're working. So just get used to hitting Command and S as much as you can. And let's go ahead and see what this looks like without the sketch. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and lock the background layer and unlock the foreground or the strokes layer. And now I can begin building some of the shapes for the foreground imagery. Alright, so I'm going to get started with some of these foreground elements. So again, I'm working in the layer above my background, and I'll go ahead and just choose my rectangle tool. The grid will line this up with that other shape, so I'm just going to line up that base, and then I'll use my white arrow, and then I get something like that. And this time I will change the color, and I'll kind of check what that's looking like without the sketch over the top. So one popular thing is creating kind of this duotone or this light side dark side value shift with these flat shapes. So I'm going to do a version of that. All I'm going to do is just take the shape, hold down on my Option key, and just make a copy of it, and I'll shift it over this way. I'll change the value to something a little bit darker, and then I will use my shape builder to get rid of the excess. So now I have something that looks like this. Might even change that to like a light gray. And so I'll be doing that with some of these other shapes too. All right, let me start on the frame for this hotel building. So I'm just using my pen tool. Create that closed shape. I'll hit Shift and C to get that corner point tool. Creates that nice curve for me. And I might bend this point a little bit more, get it to there. Now what I want to do is the same thing we did on the line icon, is I want to offset the path so that we get this inner part here, and it's going to offset it, the exact width all throughout. So I'm going to make sure it's selected, go to Object, Path, Offset Path, and get a little preview of how far that's going to go. So about 8 pixels for this one. And you can see right here, it doesn't quite get all the way down on this curve right over here. So I'm going to have to modify that manually. What I'm going to do is punch a hole through this larger shape. So I'll select that one, hold down the Shift key, select the offset path. I'll hit Shift M, and I'll delete out that inner portion. And then I'll come in with the white arrow tool, and I'm just going to drag that point down, and I'll drag this point down. And I have to readjust this just a little bit more. This is where you have to do a little bit of eyeballing. I think that looks pretty good. And I'll do the same thing I did with this this bottom base. I'm going to create that kind of duotone effect. So what I'm going to do is just shift this over to about right here. I'll select both of those, and I will use the shape builder to delete out these inner portions. I'll change the color, this one, and I need to actually come in here, and with this shape what I'm going to do is just delete this point. So if I just select it, I can come up here where it says anchors. I'll delete that point, and then I'll just kind of shift this around a little bit to soften that transition. Now with my snap to grid, okay, it ensures that I have this nice consistent anchor point placement, and those anchor points are kind of snap to the grid as well, and so that kind of gives a consistency to your shapes. All right, I'll go ahead and create another frame shape over here. It's just going to follow that same path, but the base extends out to here. I'll hit Shift C, create that curve, and then I'll offset the path right now. So I'll hit V for the black arrow, Object, Path, Offset Path, okay, so that I create that inner shape. I'll make this a little bit smaller. Thought it'd be cool to see some of this frame on this edge. 6 pixels for that one. And we'll do 5. Click OK. I'll select both of those shapes. Shift M for my shape builder, and I'll delete out that portion. And this frame shape should be in the back. So I'll right click and say Arrange, Send to Back, and then I'll change the fill color. And so that's kind of the effect we're getting right now. Alright, so now I'll begin working on these windows these kind of horizontal fixtures here on this building. So I'm going to use the rectangle tool, and I'll actually just start here right at the bottom, and I'm going to make sure to extend this out far so that I can just subtract the shape as it moves up. So I'll use my black arrow. I'm going to Alt or Option click and drag. I'm also holding down on Shift, and that way I can make the copy. And now that I'm looking at this, this is a little too small. So I'm going to delete that. I'll just make that a little bit bigger, and then I'll do the same thing. Option click and drag, and I'll get it right above the next one. Release the mouse, then release the keys, and then I'll hit Command D a few times. So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and start changing these colors a little bit. So I'm going to use a combination of the blue that I've been using. Just do it every other rectangle. And then for these other ones, go ahead and change those super light gray on that. Now with these all selected, I'll go ahead and chop out this portion. So I'll click on this shape. I'll hit Shift M for my shape builder, and I'll hold down on the Option key and get rid of those. Forgot to click these other ones, so I'm going to do a Shift click on those and then use my shape builder. Those out. See how that's looking. Okay, I'm going to move this to the front. Arrange, bring to front. And I'm going to go for another effect. I want a slight casted shadow coming off of that. So I'll take this shape and I'll do an Option and then click and drag. I'm going to send that backwards a few steps. So it's about right there. And then I'll use these shapes, chop off the top. Select this shape here, Shift M, and then I'll chop off that portion. Now I'm left with that. Now if I click on this shape, I can change the fill color. Let's try something a little bit darker. Alright, I'll start working on this part of the building, and from what I remember before, I just used the rounded rectangle on the line icon, so I'll just use the same thing, and I'll just go ahead and make a copy of it. I'll turn it, I'll shrink it down a little bit. Alright, I'll go ahead and just group those and then move them to the back. Okay, let's see how that looks. It's looking pretty good. Okay, and go ahead and try this fixture right here. For this one, I'll use the ellipse tool. And then I'll go ahead and throw down one ellipse. And then I'll just copy it. Zoom in a little bit so we can see what we're doing. So I'll use white for the top. I'll use a light gray for that bottom part. I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of it. Command C, and then paste it right in place. Command Shift V. I'll shrink this down, and I'll go ahead and change that color, change it to blue. We'll see in a second what I'm going to do. I'm creating like this rotating window right here. So I made a copy of that, and now I'm going to use the pen tool, so P for the pen tool, and I'll just draw a shape that connects to all four of those points. If I wanted to, I could combine all those shapes together. Shift M and combine. And you can use the Pathfinder tool as well to combine those, but I find it easy just to hit that keyboard shortcut and just keep moving along. So I'm going to take this part that I just made, and then I'll just copy that, and then I'll arrange it to the front. Pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and group that, Command G. I'm going to shrink it down just a little bit so it's a little bit flatter. I'm going to move it into here. Alright, so I think the last thing I'm going to do is just create these palm trees, and I'm just going to do it the same way that we did for the line icon. So I can just use my line segment tool. I could use this one too. We haven't used this one for these palm trees, but they're a great candidate. So I'll choose the arc tool. I'll hit Shift X to switch the stroke and the fill. I'll change that to a darker gray. So not bad. I'm going to go ahead and increase the point size on that and give it a little bit of a profile taper. So I'll do the same thing here. And if you don't get the right angle on this, I just go the other way. So right there, I'm not getting the right angle, so I'll just go this way. And when I'm done using a tool, I usually hold down the Command key and click. And that way it resets what I'm doing there. This one's a little tough. I'll move this around with the space bar. Cool, I like that. So I'll select all 5 of those, increase the point size, and I'll change it to another kind of stroke profile. Let's see, stroke profile 2, and then I'll go ahead and group that in G. And I'm going to go ahead, I think I'm going to make this a little bit thicker than a 3-point. Go ahead and shrink that down a little bit. Get another one in here. Just like before, I want to reflect this, and I can just grab it and move it with the black arrow, and I'll make a smaller version of it here, kind of popping out. make sure to arrange this to the front. So at this point, you want to make sure that all your colors are consistent throughout all of your flat icons or all of your line icons. Right now I can make some decisions that will affect the rest of the icons that I'm doing. So this background I want to be a little bit lighter. So we'll go over this in another exercise, but if you want to manually come in here and adjust a color, you can select the object and look for the color fill. Then if you double click on the color fill, kind of like Photoshop, you can then start to choose from here this color picker. You can actually input the actual RGB values, CMYK, the web code, but in this case I'm just going to kind of eyeball it right here. And usually you want to avoid getting a symbol that looks like this. This is just telling you you're going to have some trouble finding that exact match on the web. So here, and if you want to, you can also click on this, only web colors. Okay, this is going to give you kind of the gamut that you work within when you're on the web. This isn't always the most accurate, but it gives you a good idea. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off because we're not going to limit ourselves too much. So I'll say OK, and I just like the contrast on that a little bit better than what we had before. All right, that's looking pretty good. So at this point, you'd want to save. So I'll hit Command S and make sure that I save this file. I'm going to actually adjust the color of this sun as well. It's a little too deep right now in that orange. Okay, so at this point we've saved it, and if we wanted to see how this is looking for the web, we know that we can go to export and do export as. But I'm going to show you guys another thing you can do for testing how these icons would actually look if you wanted to use these. So I'm going to go to this one, export for screens. And what I like about this is it gives you kind of a visual view of your artboards. So in this case, I'm going to uncheck all these other artboards except for this one, the one I've been working on, artboard 5. And you definitely want to know where this is going to be saved. But right here, formats, this is the strength of this program and this saving option. So right here, it's going to allow me to save different versions of this artboard. So let me show you what that means. I'm going to go ahead and choose something from this pull-down menu for the scale. So I definitely want to have something that is just simply a 1-to-1 ratio. So I'd say ×1, and then I'm going to try another one. Okay, so I clicked add scale, but this one I want to be 0.5 times, so it's half the scale, okay, of the other one. Add another, and this one I'm going to have be 3/4 the size of the original scale. So I'll go ahead and click this export artboard. Okay, and from my desktop here, I'm going to go ahead and open up some of these. So what it does is it gives you the name of the artboard, so this is artboard 5, and then it tells you, in this case, this is 100%. This one is at 0.5 times, so at half the size. This is at 3/4 of the size. So I'll go ahead and double click this first one and make sure that my actual size is on. I'll double click this next one and look at that. Half the size. That's how it's going to look. I'll double click this one. This one's 3/4. And so here you can see we have these different versions. Okay, we have the full 1-to-1 size for this icon. Okay, and this is the resolution and the quality that we'd be getting if we actually started using this. This is one that is 3/4 of the size, and this is one that's half the size. And you can see that even at half the size, this is looking pretty recognizable. A lot of the features are still maintained. You can make out that those are little trees, and slowly you can kind of deduce that this is a sunset. Of course, the larger ones are easy to read, but sometimes when you're working with different web formats, you're going to have to work in smaller icons. Alright, so that does it for my flat style icon. I hope that was helpful. Just remember, guys, I started with putting the sketch on the top of the layer stack. Changed the blend mode to this multiply mode. So I'll go ahead and click on it, multiply, and drop the opacity, and that made it so that I could see the sketch while I was working. I made sure to have at least 2 layers, so a background layer, okay, with all the elements in back, and then all my foreground objects here in front. And then the other big part of working on something like this is using that shape builder tool. So make sure that becomes your best friend, Shape Builder and Pathfinder. Otherwise, it just takes way too long to try to line these things up and cut out these shapes. So hopefully you can make sure you've mastered that in the exercises and then give this one a try.